Hello, everyone. This is Howard Fox, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series, the podcast that celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Bert terHart is our guest today. Bert is a soldier, sailor, scientist, adventurer, and serial entrepreneur. He has had a lifelong passion for the oceans and oceanography, with advanced degrees in math, physics, and physical oceanography. Bert's entrepreneurial journey has led to the creation of best-in-class software and technical tools used by healthcare professionals worldwide. And he also has a passion for the oceans that has translated into more than 45,000 of blue water sailing and a keen advocacy for citizen scientists and all of us. Bert, it is a pleasure at 5 o'clock on a Friday to have you join me on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, Howard, I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this because I think you and I would have a lot to talk about. We'd have a lot in common, and if we were in Victoria right now, we'd be sitting in that hotel right behind you, having an adult beverage, as you so aptly put it earlier on.
Oh yeah, I have to say, as I was researching for the episode, and I realized Victoria has a place here, and I remember walking this pier. I remember the hotel, and I remember, it wasn't the best experience work-wise, but I remember how beautiful Victoria was, and just the boats out there. I'm thinking, God, I wish I was on a sailboat instead of the drudgery of my day job, which was in IT consulting. But you live in a beautiful place in the world, so definitely I am envious. I think that's the correct word. A little envious there. But are you originally from that neck of the woods? Is this where you grew up? And let's talk about a little bit about that, and maybe talk a little bit about this grand adventure that you have been on.
Well, I didn't grow up anywhere near the ocean. So
Okay.
in terms of Canada, I grew up as far away from every ocean that you can imagine. So that's in the
Okay.
center, as far away from the Atlantic as I was from the Pacific, as I was from the Arctic.
Calgary or something?
No, even more isolated and desolate. I grew up in a little town called Estevan, Saskatchewan, which is
Okay.
about it is 9 miles north of the U.S. border, and about 120 miles or so north of Fargo, North Dakota. So
Oh, wow.
everyone has some idea of what Fargo, North Dakota is like, and that's
Yes.
whatever horrors your mind can conjure up. Apologies to anyone who's living out in Fargo. That's what Esteban was like, and
Oh, okay.
it was the prairie. And my parents are Dutch. That's thus the curious last name.
Okay.
And my father was a merchant mariner. He had navigation skills, which translated into being a land surveyor, and he just ended up in Estevan, Saskatchewan, where I was raised and clearly born. So
Okay.
nowhere near the ocean by any stretch.
Nowhere near it. Now, I seem to recall there was a town when I was in my IT days. There was this project that was supposedly going to take place up in like Yellowknife, or there was a diamond mine up there. I think it was
Mhm.
either Saskatchewan or Alberta, but I just remember that's a long way away and it's hard to get to. And I couldn't imagine how cold it got in the middle of the winter. So so you're living in a beautiful place up in the Northwest, and so I imagine the weather's a little bit different. And what was this journey of yours? I mean, what did you say to yourself or to your parents? I got to get out of here. And what was that career trajectory for you?
Well, I left Estevan when I was very young.
Okay.
And I went to the Canadian equivalent of West Point. So I went to
Hmm.
military college.
Okay.
And the plan for me was to go to sea because my father, like I had mentioned, was a mariner. His father, his grandfather, the same thing on my mom's side. And my dad actually rowed and sailed to work. So it seems like there was
Well,
salt water running through my blood. So I left Estevan, went to military college. At the time, all the Canadian services, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force were under one roof. So I wanted to go to sea. I wanted to get a degree in oceanography, and I wasn't so keen on the military or the Navy, but that was the only place you could get an undergraduate degree in physical oceanography. And then if you made the grade, they would send you to graduate school so I could be a scientist. So all those things you see in my profile, or as you mentioned. So I get to military college, and they're sorting you out into Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever the case might be. And I discover I'm completely colorblind. So on a
Ah,
scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you see nothing but black and white, I'm a 9. So
ooh,
I had no idea. So it ends up they give me the option, the typical option, which is, would you like, hey terHart, you have two choices. You can be in the Army or the Army. What do you want to do? So, so I wasn't prepared to quit. So I end up being in the Army, and I'm drawn to hard things, it seems. So I ended up in the Canadian Special Service Force, and which is a wonderful adventure. Dressed up like a bush, jumping out of an airplane, and all and all these crazy places. But I just wanted to go to sea and be a scientist. So as soon as my stint was up, I applied to graduate school, got in, finished, and then now I finally get to go to sea. I finally get to get in a ship and do what I've always wanted. And then right at that moment, the Canadian government completely, all the funding for any shipborne research was just evaporated overnight.
really?
So that so then this idea of going to sea suddenly is gone. And but I have skills. I have computer skills because physics and math at the time we were doing oceanic atmospheric modeling and coupling. So I was beavering away as a scientist doing physical oceanography, working on these large scale, very difficult, computationally challenging models. And I had a doctor friend of mine who I knew actually since I was in grade 3, and he always wanted to be a doctor, and I always wanted to be a scientist. So he ends up being a doctor, and I ended up being trying to be a scientist. And he says, "Bert, I'm opening a very large clinic in Los Angeles. I'm moving from Calgary, a place that you had mentioned. We're going to open this clinic in Calgary, but I have these ideas, and I want to automate all this. So we're going to need a computer programmer. Do you think you could program this stuff?" So I said yes. And I fell into basically working in the healthcare industry as a programmer, as an IT guy at the time when doctors' offices, most of them didn't even have computers.
Right.
So so the I would say that the landscape was ripe for someone with those kinds of skills, and we ended up writing software eventually in 2,500 doctors' offices all across North America and Great Britain and Australia, New Zealand as well. So Canada, of course, and then that sort of grew into one sort of IT endeavor to another one to another one to another one. So I've had my fingers in the IT pie in the healthcare industry now for a very long time, and I love the work. I love the challenge of it. I love the difficulty of coding. So maybe it's my obsessive compulsive disorder. Maybe it's my unwillingness to quit. So I'm not sure with it. It's one of those things, I'm sure. But so that's how I found. Eventually came back to Canada,
Right.
and I was traveling a lot, and I needed and my friend, the doctor, was commuting to work in a helicopter. It was only taking him 20 minutes. So I took a compass and I drew a 20-minute circle around Vancouver International Airport, I was flying out of there all the time, taking me hours and hours to get there. And sure enough, on Gabriola Island, there's a seaplane base, and I can get on a seaplane and be in Vancouver International Airport in less than 20 minutes. So that's how I end up here. And that's kind of I suppose maybe the 45,000-foot view of my rather esoteric and circuitous
Life journey.
professional path, let's say. Yeah, my journey.
I love that. First off, I think it's very cool. And I remember from my time in Victoria, the consultants that were from Canada that worked on this project, they would fly in via seaplane or helicopter from Vancouver. I thought, gee, how cool is that? Or if you lived on an island, how
Yeah.
cool is that? I mean, for me, there's nothing worse than being in an airport, especially stuck in an airport. I do remember too, I kind of irritated the customs guy at the airport in Victoria, but that's a whole other story. The guy let me in, and that's what counts.
Yeah, yeah.
So I am curious. Then you've had this career, the military, the programming, the coding. this entrepreneurial and or employ a spin to this, helping your friend the doctor.
Mhm.
At what point did you? Are you? I imagine you're still running the business
Mhm.
in some shape or fashion, but you're in a position where you can also walk away knowing that the business is going to continue to run and you get to have fun,
Mhm.
which is kind of why we're here with the Outdoor Adventure Series. You've been on a lot of adventures. And so, where did this breakaway, from business, and how did you then start to embark on these adventures, these nautical adventures? And I know you have a passion for not using technology on the boats, especially when you're sailing with the, which is a whole other out of my comfort zone. But I like to see the coast, by the way. I don't want to go too
Yeah.
far away from it. But how did you begin to tap into this passion for just being outside and this adventurous spirit?
Well, I think that being an entrepreneur uh, and being an adventurer slash explorer, they are one and the same. It's a slightly different context. Like you cannot be successful as an entrepreneur if you're not willing to step well outside your comfort zone, if you're not willing to take risks, if you're not willing to lead, if you're not willing to lead literally from the front, like it will just be you. And it's exactly the same if you choose to head out on some wild and crazy expedition. I mean, all of North America, the exploration of North America, and in particular the mapping of North America, which really fascinates me, was driven by um, the entrepreneurial spirit of the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company. The
Sure.
same thing can be said about parts of the United States. Astor was a fur trader, and he was absolutely and completely fascinated by the by map making and how powerful something like the knowledge of the geography, how that can drive entrepreneurial and business success. So
Mhm.
they are very, very closely related. And I've always had this idea that, well, I guess working for my dad as a young kid, we were always outside. As he was a land surveyor, as I mentioned. So you were always outside. And growing up in the middle of Canada, there's the weather is extremely harsh, and that just didn't stop you. There was
Right.
just because it was miserable or cold, that was not an excuse to do what had to get done.
Sure.
So, and of course, in the army, I mean, imagine this. Imagine that you've been tasked with protecting Victoria, like I see behind you, and the call goes out for soldiers, and it goes something like this: soldiers required to protect the harbor of Victoria. When the going gets tough, you get to go home. No, that's those aren't the guys you want, right? So this idea of if you're in the army of quitting when it gets hard, that's just not in the equation.
Mhm.
So that's just I left. I was very young when I left, and that was a formative part of me becoming an adult, and that was just always in the cards. It gets tough. It's like, oh well, you signed on for this. You only have yourself to blame. So, and that's the same thing with if you're in a leadership role in a business, whether the business is yours or someone else's, you just don't get to throw your hands up in defeat, throw a tantrum, and go home and watch Netflix. It starts to get hard. That's not No one's paying you to do that, right? And everyone expects you to bear up under the pressure
Mhm.
and lead from the front and make decisions, good or bad, whatever they are, and then have a plan, all those things. And that's the same. If you just take all that out of the boardroom and put it into the bush, it's exactly the same thing. The,
Mhm.
the difference is the stakes are way higher because in the boardroom, no one's dying that day, quite literally.
Right.
But if you're in the bush, then it can all go very bad very, very quickly.
Sure.
And
Sure.
if you chose to walk across the United States without any electronic navigation and just the basics. Just imagine what someone who would have done it 200 years ago.
Mhm.
The the conditions that you would experience are very much unchanged, even though you're doing it today versus the person doing it 200 years ago.
Sure.
So that's firstly, it's a wonderful way to reconnect with a part of our history, and secondly, I think it's a wonderful way to find out a little bit about yourself, a little, certainly much more about the country, and best of all, the people you meet. I can assure you, I can tell you with all sincerity, from the bottom of my heart, the people that you meet, they will they will wash away. They'll turn to dust every hardship that you can imagine. They are just so amazing and so fascinating, and it's so interesting to bump into them. Given and you're standing out a little bit from the crowd if you're pulling a canoe down the highway or
Right.
or
Well, I want to talk about that because that. Well, first off, there's on the website, and it's kind of off to my side, and I see the slides flipping on the carousel is your Cape journey. And by the way, I did have to do a quick AI search on, okay, what is the geographic definition of a Cape? It's
yeah.
like, okay, I get that. That's good. That's part of my research. I know a lot of stuff, but I don't know. I know sometimes it doesn't go as deep as I need, so I have to do my research. This journey with the canoeing, going from Vancouver in the sound there across Canada. How did that come about? And that to me was must have been a no, that's an adventure I would love to go on because
Mm.
it's definitely within my comfort zone.
Hmm.
Physically, it may not be, but uh, I sit at a desk a lot. That's my
Hmm.
uh, that's the thing I have to worry about. However, what was that adventure like, and how did you just wake up one day and say, "Gee, I want to do that," or how did you don't just even as an entrepreneurial uh, uh, somebody passionate about entrepreneurism, you don't just do it. You have to do a little planning and how am I going to execute this? So how did that adventure come about?
Well, I don't know where to start because it's let me start here. So when I
Okay.
told my dad that I was going to attempt a solo nonstop circumnavigation without any electronic tools whatsoever, and then in suburban, he looked at me and he said, "I thought you were smarter than that." And then and then when I came back,
Thanks.
I was looking around for something to do, and then I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to attempt a solo cross continent, ocean to ocean canoe trip." And my dad looked at me and said, "I thought you learned something last time." So, and one of the first things I wrote about the canoe trip was I was in the canoe training here on Gabriola, looking across at the mountains that are east of Vancouver. And I sat in the canoe and just stopped, and I had this horrible sense and feeling of dread just descended on me like someone was dropping anvils out of the sky. And so when I got back, I wrote this thing, and it was one man, one canoe, one country, one very bad idea. So so it was so I had an idea of what I was into, of what I was in for, and I had come back from the circumnavigation, was looking for something else to do. So my life is basically chunked up into 6 months blocks, basically. So what can I
Okay.
do that's really interesting? And one of the reasons I went sailing was to follow literally in the wakes of all the great navigators and explorers and hydrographers that you would know. So that would be Captain Cook, Cap, Captain Bligh, Vancouver, La Perouse, Bodega de Quadra, all these guys. And all those guys are contemporaries of the people who mapped North America. So that would be Lewis and Clark
Mhm.
in the U.S. That would be in Canada, Thompson, Mackenzie, Fraser, Turner, Fiddler, all these guys. And there was this mapping explosion that just literally blew across the whole world as soon as they figured out how to measure longitude, or how to measure how far east or west you are. Then that knowledge just blew up in the form of a map of the entire world. And at the same time, North America was being mapped. And I decided, well, I'd sailed around the world, and I'd sailed all up and down the west coast of Canada, out into the Bering Sea, out in the Aleutian Islands, again in the footsteps of all the explorers who had been there before. So I thought, well, an addendum to that would be to follow in the footsteps of the contemporaries of those great oceanographers, and that would be Mackenzie and Thompson and Clark and Lewis and all those guys. So that's what I did. I came back, looked around for something to do, uh, because I had read all the journals about Mackenzie and all these other guys before, and they were very closely related to the oceanic navigators and cartographers, like Ed mentioned. I decided I would paddle across the country in their wakes, in a canoe, doing it the way that they did. And um, I hadn't been in a canoe I mean, the last time I was in a canoe was 40 years prior to that.
Mm.
I had never been on a solo canoe trip. I mean, the only canoe trip I'd ever been on was with a bunch of school kids. I was asked to go as one of the chaperones. 40 years ago was the last time I was on a trip. Uh, and that was in Algonquin Park, basically north of of the Great Lakes. And with a friend when I was in the army at the time, and it was just basically kicking around Algonquin Park. I'd never been on an overland expedition by myself, always under the auspices of the military. So
Hmm.
this wasn't something, and it wasn't something I had dreamt about in doing. So I decided to do it, and then stuck my head down and got everything together, made a plan, made all the things that you were supposed to do, and then left, and then um, figured out, well, I shouldn't say I figured out along the way. That's being flippant, but it's 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 physically and mentally very demanding. But
Hmm.
in the grand scheme of things, it's not like sailing around the world. That's a whole different kettle of fish. That's astonishingly difficult. So
Well, and I realize as uh, we're you're sharing this with me and our and soon to be listeners, is I'm remiss. I should have asked which came first. And I guess the hint was your dad saying, "Haven't you learned anything yet?" So what? So I get the mindset that you wanted to follow in the footsteps of the great oceanic explorers, but how did that journey, this beautiful sailboat, Sea Bourbon, I love the name, by the way. That's up there with some of my favorite names when it comes to
oh
podcasting or names of boats. My boat is going to be called Impulse Power. So
oh there you
if I ever owned a boat, I was part owner of a boat. And I was a very bad racer. Uh,
mm.
Keels and spinnakers and I just don't get along. Um, Having said all that, what was the mindset at the time? Like, I want to go do this, and this idea. How did you begin to put that into fruition of making it happen and spending the time that it was going to take to be out there in the ocean by yourself? And what kind of led to that?
Well, it's I had sailed extensively up and down the coast of British Columbia. Again,
Hmm.
my interest was following in in Cook's path, following in Vancouver's path, La Perouse's path. So they had mapped all of the west coast of North America, and
Hmm.
it's an astonishingly harsh and brutal coast. So
Hmm.
to chart it it's just it's mind-numbingly hard.
Hmm.
And considering the tools that they had, it's shocking at how good they were. Like for instance, Cook Cook mapped the island of Newfoundland in Canada,
Hmm.
and he did it using a plane table, and he just picked it up as a hobby. He saw a surveyor doing it when they were surveying in gun emplacements because the French were going to be attacked by the British. The
Hmm.
British were busy building artillery placements because they were going to bomb Fort Royal. And Cook he was a lieutenant at the time, and he looked over his shoulder and he saw this surveyor using a plane table, and he decided that's a really good thing. I could use that to chart, because he had been tasked with getting the British fleet. He and the other master mates or mates masters, they'd been tasked with surveying the St. Lawrence River so they could get the British ships could get up the river and attack Quebec, which is no mean feat. It's very difficult. The rivers, there's lots of problems, but he
Hmm.
he had he had distinguished himself in that endeavor. So he was eventually tasked with surveying the coast of Newfoundland, which is an unbelievably brutal place. And his maps were the best maps of Newfoundland until after the Second World War. So he did this in 17, I want to say 1780, around that time. So and imagine what you would have for tools in 1780 that couldn't, and what you produced with them couldn't be superseded for the next 150 plus years. It's astonishing.
Hmm.
And it's this, the same can be said about the people who surveyed in other places in Canada.
Mhm.
So and my dad was a land surveyor. I'm a technical guy. Those sorts of things fascinate me. I have a mathematical bent, and I was just fascinated how unbelievably competent these people were. I
Mhm.
said, how in the world could these people have become so competent? So as a business person, as an entrepreneur, you're always looking for competent people. You need competent people. Like
Mhm.
my first job is always to replace myself so
Right.
I can do the things that I want to do. I mean, there's
Mhm.
no real business is built just around you. It
Mhm.
just isn't. It can't be that way. So I'm always fascinated by how I'm fascinated truly and deeply by the competencies of others, and they're always in areas that you never can possibly predict, or I guess sleuth out from the cover of that particular book. And one of the things that fascinated me about sailing up and down this coast was how unbelievably hard it is. Number one, it's a brutal coast to be on. It's called out just outside the Straits of Juan de Fuca. It's the graveyard of the Pacific, for good reason. Um, and I I was motivated. I mean, I thought, okay, sailing up and down the coast is one thing, but everybody that got here by sailing around the world.
Right.
How tough is that? How tough would it be to sail around the world and try to approximate the conditions that those people had done it, did it with? And of course, the boats are vastly different. The sails, all the cloth, the material, the clothing, especially the food, of course. But
Mhm.
there's one thing you can do to very closely mimic the experience of those people who have come before you, and that's to get lost. If you were to step out into the bush and get lost, the feeling of terror that rises up inside you is exactly the same as it was 10,000 years ago.
Mhm.
So you had mentioned earlier you don't particularly like to lose sight of land. It's not because you're afraid of the ocean, but fundamentally for most people, I'm not saying this for you, of course, but for most people, it's that they get lost because at sea there's no landmarks. Literally, there's no landmarks. There's nothing to look at.
Right.
So, or nothing that can give you any kind of reference where you are and therefore where you need to go, unless you know how to use a sextant
Right.
and how to navigate using the sun, moon, planet, and stars. And that's how they did it. All of Canada, all of North America, all of the world basically was mapped with a sextant. People who knew how to tell time with a sextant, how to tell time from the sun, moon, and stars, and how to figure out how far north and south, east, or west they were with the sun,
Right.
moon, and stars. So that's how I decided, okay, I'm going to go find out what it's like to sail around the world. So I did that, and I came back and said, well, it seems natural then to find out how hard it would be to walk across Canada, and paddle. So there's how those things all wind up together.
Okay. So now I am really curious. When your dad said, "Have you learned no lessons, son?" What did he mean there?
Well, my father, of all the pieces of advice I got before I went on the circumnavigation, that was the best one because everyone would say, oh, the people that I had told, the very few people I told, so, oh, you've got this, Bert, or you're the guy to do it. And of course, none of that is valuable, right? That
Yeah.
doesn't give you any pause for reflection, which is what you need. You got to take a step back, look in the mirror, and just ask yourself if you're really crazy, and if you really believe you have what it takes to get it done. And if you don't ask yourself those questions, you will very soon be asking them, and the environment in which you will be asking is not going to be conducive to getting a really good answer because you're going to be highly stressed. The
Mhm.
conditions are going to be far from ideal, and the decision you make at that time is going to be very important. So it's best to ask those decisions before you're thrust into a condition or into a situation where getting the answer wrong is catastrophic. So
Has consequences.
my brother, who's a pilot, he has thousands and thousands of hours. He would say that the superior pilot uses his superior judgment to ensure that his superior skills are never required. So So my dad was referring, said, I thought you were smart on that. Like, I thought you would have thought this through enough that you would have said no to this because my father knew exactly, he had a pretty good idea of what I was in for. And he was, of course, very concerned because he's my father. And the chances of you coming back are not good. They're they're not good. The chances of the boat coming back are not good. The number of people who've tried and failed is very, very high. The number of people who've actually made it is extremely low. and everything has to go your way. There's very little room for things to go south and for you to come out on the other side of that. So he had a pretty good idea. And that's why he was basically saying, take a step back, ask yourself some really good questions, and then maybe you'll come up with a good answer. So he, a priori, had assumed that I'd asked all those things, and I had ignored the answer, which was don't go.
All right. Okay, I appreciate that. So I'm curious, two questions that are really percolating right now. One, you kind of alluded to, um, these are two very lonely endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One question is about mindset. How do you stay present and in the moment so that you can keep moving forward? That's one question. And the other one is, and you alluded to it during the crossing on the canoe, there's help along the way. So
Mm-hmm.
how did you keep the loneliness at bay? And also, what was the experience of having help along the way in both of these adventures?
Well, the solo trip is solo. There is you're not allowed to get any help. Well, you're not allowed to get help in certain contexts. So
Right.
the trip that and to be honest, the trip across Canada was far lonelier than the trip around the world, even though I was in places where there were people, and the help the help is it's always it's encouragement. So at sea, I was getting encouragement
Okay.
from via email, but and paddling, you're getting encouragement from the people um, that you're bumping into. But both of them are they're well, I hesitate to say that I was lonely. I was
Okay.
alone, but
Okay.
I wasn't lonely.
Okay.
The loneliest I've ever been has been watching a professional hockey game, watching the Vancouver Canucks play in Vancouver. When there's 22,000 people in the stadium, and if you fell out of the rafters and hit the ice, they would just sweep you to the side and out of the way because you're holding the game up. They could
Uh-huh.
no one really cares that you're there. It's a very
No.
lonely experience because, of course, it's fun and engaging and everything, but no one knows your name. No one cares to know anything about you. You're just another cog in the wheel. And if you and it's interesting just to kind of step back when you're in those kind of situations and look around you, as opposed to being engaged in the game itself, and realize how to me it struck me as how all these people are singularly isolated but focused on a single thing, which is the game. So there's nothing wrong with it, but it's an interesting sort of thought experiment. But I would say that you mentioned something about how do you stay in the moment, and that actually is the secret. It is the secret to these sort of things. You have to be embedded in the moment. The future it's none of your business. It's above my pay grade. I have no idea what the future is going to be. So I'm always, and the past is gone. All you can do from the past is learn. So and just not hopefully not make the same mistakes.
Mhm.
So I have found that if you're completely wedded to the outcome, then you're not living in the moment. You can easily be dissuaded, and you can easily be distracted from what needs to be done, because who knows, like tomorrow or the week from now, you have no idea what the actual playing field, if I can use that analogy, is going to look like.
Mhm.
So if I'm completely wedded to some future outcome, and I do so with in sort of blind obedience to it, completely divorced from the moment, it's a recipe for disaster, because you have no idea if you're headed in the wrong direction. So I try to remain completely embedded in the process, and a very simple sort of positive feedback loop that keeps me mindful of the plan, and that I have a very good idea of what I would like the outcome to be, but I'm constantly reassessing what I think that is, given
Mhm.
what's happening right now. So if you're embedded in the moment, then well, think of it this way: if you got into a small boat and I said to you, do you think you can sail? Do you think you can spend the next 9 months in this little space in the middle of the ocean, away from everybody, the nearest person to you, 2,000 or 200 miles that way in the International Space Station? Does that sound like a good idea? Well, hopefully you'd say no, because that's, if you didn't, there's something wrong with you. But if I said to
Right.
you, could you get in this little boat and sail to the end of take it out to the mouth of the harbor? Well, chances are you'd say, yeah, I can do that if you've been around boats at all. Even if you haven't, you can get in a canoe and just float your way there.
Right.
So, I mean, it's simplistic because I'm ignoring all the skills and things you have to have, but that was my mindset. Can I get here? If I'm paddling, can I get to this point? Can I get to that point? Can I get across this river? Yeah, do I have to portage here? When's the next time I can get food? Do I need to stop and eat now? What's the weather going to be like? So let's say that you have this idea that you're going to paddle across a wide open bay and the weather changes. You go, okay, it doesn't matter because the only goal I have is to get to the other side. But the conditions now, the conditions which you had no idea were going to change have changed, and the conditions are telling you to turn around. And if you don't turn around, I mean, me against Mother Nature is, I'm never going to win, right?
Right.
Never. So you have to ask yourself in that moment, what do I do? They're going to reassess, right? I'm not completely wedded to getting to the other side, because that now is a very bad plan. No matter how badly I want to do it, or how any other future part of this whole endeavor hinges on that thing, I can't do it now. So I got to go back now, or I got to do something else now. And then, so that this idea of constant reassessment, constantly living in the now, is one way to make sure that you actually are moving forward all the time. And secondly, to avoid all these things like, oh, poor me. It's all so hard. It's all so difficult. I wish there was someone here.
Okay. Very good. I am curious now, with your background in science and the military, the discipline, and also the discipline and the love of this adventure and being out, whether it's the canoeing or the sailing. How has this begun to inform this other interest you have, which is the science, the advocacy for our environment and conservation? How is though these experiences you've had, how are they informing this bent to be for citizen science?
Well, I think that as a scientist, as a formally trained scientist, we were all you need data. You have to get data, and you need to have real world data. You can't just sit in your office and make it up. You can when you're working when you want to have some approximation of what it is that you're looking into, but in the end, you need real data. And real data is very hard to get. It's very expensive. It's one of the reasons why anything to do with earth sciences tends to be a very expensive undertaking, because you have to go get real world data. And some places in the real world are very hard to get to,
Mhm.
and they're very difficult places to do any kind of science. So I know that because that's what I wanted to do. That's the kind of science I wanted to do. I know how expensive it is. I know how valuable that data is. And we didn't care where it came from. For example, most of the shipboard data that's driving atmospheric models, certainly back in the day before, well, still right now, it was people on ships like my father, commercial and military ships, that were reporting back every watch what the weather conditions were like, because
Mhm.
that's real world data. They would sit there, make a physical observation of wave height, winds, precipitation, cloud cover, temperature, humidity, and they'd write that down, and then it would get reported back, where that data would be collated and then used. If you look at, I mean, people who are sailors might know something about pilot charts. Pilot charts were pioneered by a U.S. Navy guy by the name of Maury, and he collected all shipborne data and then created pilot charts, which are oceanic atlases of the world broken up per month. And pilot charts were an absolute game changer for the way navigators crossed oceans. They were one of the
Mhm.
things that enabled um, fairly safe commercial maritime traffic, which is one of the things that allows us to live the life that we live now. It was a phenomenal undertaking and an absolute game changer. It changed the world. It was all done using citizen scientists.
Okay.
And it just so happens these people being in the right place at the right time. So sailing to wild places like the Aleutian Islands, I would reach out to places like the University of British Columbia and say, hey, I'm going to this place and I'm willing to put a PhD student or a couple of PhD students in this place. Are you doing research in this area? So I've had foresters on board the boat. I've had biologists on board the boat, and because they want to go to these places that they could never afford to go to, be impossible, and to get very, very interesting data. So that's and everyone can do that, because it doesn't matter what you might be passionate about. Somewhere there's a scientist who is more passionate, who has actually dedicated their entire life to those things that just might, just might pique your interest. So there isn't anything, literally, there isn't anything that someone can conjure up, something that interests them. There's a scientist somewhere who's studying that in detail that you might not even be able to imagine, and they would love to have you collect data for them. So sailing around the world, I was doing macroplastic surveys. I was trying to do microplastic surveys. I was doing sort of trying to assess, albatross counts basically in the Southern Ocean. So again, sailing up into the Aleutian Islands, I was involved with Sitka spruce migration. Sitka spruce is actually an invasive species here, but it's one of the most important species in all of the West Coast, certainly to First Nations cultures. But it's an invasive species, started in California, it's working its way up the coast. So these PhD students were trying to find the genetic diversity of Sitka spruce, and there we were in some crazy Aleutian island boring trees. So it's fascinating and fun. So of course, I like these sorts of things, but there isn't, you might, of course, people are interested in birds, people are interested in even raccoons. The list, it's endless, right? It's endless.
And I'd have to go look at the episode library, but we have actually interviewed a woman who's part of the educational component of gathering together citizen scientists to participate in these data gathering endeavors for studies. How is your current work, especially with the AI work, the leaf brain? How is that informing the as you cross paths with your interest in being outside, the nature and adventure, gathering data for citizen science? How is that? What's that cross section look like?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I remember giving talks to business leaders in Vancouver primarily, and I was always talking about story. And the difference between an explorer and an adventurer is that the explorer writes about it. He sits down, or she sits down, and puts pen to paper, and then describes what they did and their experience. Not so much in the terms of really objective terms. So if you read the journals of Lewis and Clark, or if you read the journals of any explorer that you can mention, they're an explorer because they wrote about it. But there are other people who were adventuring in those same places. You have no idea who they are. So this idea of story is fundamental, I think, to enterprise, and fundamental towards advancing a particular enterprise. However you want to define it, enterprise. And I was always fascinated by story, and I think that story was a very good way to push an enterprise forward. And we can see that in social media. One of the reasons I think that for many, of course, why social media is sort of run roughshod over the world is because it's this incredible medium that's available to anyone to tell stories. And the stories are all personal, and they can be incredibly profound and provide an unbelievable amount of traction depending on the audience, of course. So what AI is doing, it's changing the way that businesses in particular communicate with their customers. In essence, it's changing the way in which those businesses are telling their story. So one of the reasons that I think that most businesses, well, I won't say struggle, but find it challenging to find new customers. Small businesses. My father was a small businessman. I have a soft spot for small business people. The primary concern is this customer going to be my last customer, or is my next customer going to be my last customer? And it's one of the reasons that's a challenge, is that most people that you interact with in your community don't actually know what you do. So in order to tell them what you do, then you need to tell the story of some description, right? And then AI is completely rewriting the landscape on how we communicate, certainly business to business, business to consumer. And we've been embedded in a world of AI for far longer than we know. So the first software I wrote was differential diagnostic software for doctors. And of course, it was just really dumb AI, but that's what it was. We were taking a knowledge base, basically a small language model, basically defined by a couple of professionals, and turning it into a computer program that would ask you questions, and then you'd give it answers, and it would come up with a with a diagnosis. So, and then an autopilot. Every commercial airplane you've ever been on, I've ever been on, has been flown by an autopilot, which is very good AI. Otherwise, they'd be falling out of the sky, which is what happened, which is what was happening to Boeing just a few maybe a year ago. Was that their AI, their autopilot, was just was not asking very good questions.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so we're living in this sea of AI, and if you'll excuse the pun, but now it's become mainstream, and everybody can play with it. And of course, it's unbelievably good at what it does. And there are caveats, of course, but it's fundamentally changing the way that businesses tell stories, and that's why it's interesting to me.
Okay, very good. Before we head out, I have a couple questions and one more curiosity. What is your next adventure that you are kind of planning? Are you open to sharing what that might be?
Yeah, so I have a particular philosophy about that. Is that once you speak something into the universe, then it becomes real.
Here you
Right?
go. This is
Yeah.
a
So here
great
you go.
venue for it.
So I am paddling from the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains to the Arctic Ocean, and then down the Arctic coast. So I'm going from Rocky Mountain House, which is near Calgary, eventually going up to the mouth of the Mackenzie River, which is Tuktoyaktuk, and then down the east or the southern shores of the Arctic Ocean to the mouth of the Coppermine River. And I'm following originally in the footsteps of an American by the name of Peter Pond, a bona fide scoundrel. And then, of course, the Mackenzie River is Alexander Mackenzie, and down the Arctic coast is following the footsteps of Franklin, the guy who the British explorer and Navy guy who died a horrible death up in the Arctic, and then John Ray, the surveyor who surveyed that whole coast. So again, this is the bow on top of the whole bundle. So it will be hopefully, if I can stay healthy and pull it off, it's Pacific, Atlantic, Arctic. So this is what I'm doing next summer.
I love it, and well, we wish you the best, and I'm sure I hope we are able to cross paths again and hear about that experience. Now, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, Bert, whether it's the exploratory adventures or the business adventures, where are the best places to go?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is to go to bertterhart.com. So that's BERTTERHART. So just my name, bertterhart.com. And from there, there's links out to social media. There's links out to the circumnavigation and the cross Canada stuff. There's links out to the business, and so you can heaven forbid you land there, but there's lots of places to go. And if you actually Google my name, I'm sad to say that there's way too much on there. So
oh, that's a good problem to have. That's a good problem to have. One last couple questions before we actually do say goodbye tonight is, as you look back, you've had a really amazing life of adventure. Has there been, say, an aha moment for you where you kind of do look back and you say, wow, this is happening?
Well, I think yeah, there was one moment in particular, and I was deep in the Southern Ocean, and I was at the end of a kind of a tough stretch, end of a storm, and I was standing out in the cockpit, two hands on a railing, looking around the ocean, just seeing what I was going to be in for, and trying to screw up my courage again for the next couple of rounds. And you can't let go of anything, because as soon as you're not attached to the boat, you get flung.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked behind me and took two hands off this bar and got thrown and then bent over backwards over top of the compass, and I hurt my back and ankle. And that's all bad news. So I crawled back down into the cabin, strapped myself down to a bed, and figured I'd be there for the next 2 days. I couldn't move. I luckily the weather was relatively calm. I figured I had 24 hours. I could hopefully recover. And unbeknownst to me, there was a group of kids following this trip. There was a whole school of kids following this trip in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And I got an email from their teacher, because they were following the trip. There was 3,500 kids following the circumnavigation all around the world, places as far away as Kenya. and New Zealand. So they were really engaged. And the rule was if they emailed me, I would email them back. So I get an email from the teacher saying that congratulations of getting around this cape or getting past the Crozier Islands or the Crozet Islands. I'm sorry. And she said when they found out where I was, one of these little kids jumped up and said, "Carry on, Mr. terHart." And I don't know where that came from, but that's what they would tell you in military college when they dismissed you, was "Carry on, Mr. terHart." So this guy, this is an air base. His dad must have been in the military. And I thought at that moment, if I disappoint this kid, because clearly he just was so absolutely enthralled and engaged, I said to myself, if I can't get up off this out of my bunk, and if I can't get this thing done, so I don't disappoint this one little kid, then I'm doing the wrong thing at the wrong place, and I'm the wrong guy to do it. So that moment, I realized, one, there's an element and an aspect of what you're doing, and this can be true for anyone. You have no idea how that's shaping and transforming the lives of other people. You have no idea. If you're a small business person, you can make a huge impact on your community, on the people that work for you, on the people you're doing work for, and you don't know what that looks like, and you have no idea at just how marvelous it can be. And I thought at that moment, wow, I got to do this at least for this guy. And in that moment, I realized that this might be just a little bit bigger than me looking at trying to do something crazy.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for gifting us with that moment. Any final thoughts or insights that you'd like to share? I know you, in the show notes, you had talked about Joseph Campbell, the hero with a
Yeah.
thousand faces, but
Yes.
whether it's that or another insight that you'd like to share before we head out today.
Well, I think what I would like to say is boring is best. If you if you it doesn't matter what.
Boring is safe.
Well, actually, boring will get you there. So
Okay.
I if you're willing to do the same thing over and over and over a day, no matter how boring it might be, you can actually paddle or walk across the country. Or maybe if you're willing to sail a boat at what's little more than a quick walk, you can actually sail around the world. If you're actually willing to sit down and persist in what you're doing in business, which quite often can be very boring, if you're willing to persist at that, chances are you're going to succeed. And I don't care. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care how novel and exciting it is. Pretty soon it's going to get boring. And in order for you to master that, you better be willing to stick with what is boring. Think of the number of airplanes I've jumped out of. It's all very boring for me. You can't wait to get out of the airplane because it's uncomfortable and it's whatever, right? And you sailing in a small boat after 260 days, it all becomes rather routine and kind of boring, but even no matter how crazy it might be. So this idea of boring is best can stand you in pretty good stead, no matter which direction you might be headed.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you for that. And I have to say, the best part of what I do here, I mean, I love coaching. I love having those conversations that help people along in their career and how they navigate their challenges. But the best part about the podcasting is having conversations with guests like you and or even could be the young high schooler who's a
Mhm.
photographer and likes taking pictures of owls in the Pacific Northwest. It's exciting because it's somebody I get to meet and
Mhm.
chat with and hear about their experiences, and that's the best part about it. And you've had some amazing experiences, so I look forward to continuing to follow your adventures. So, Bert, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today on the Outdoor Adventure Series.
No, Howard, the pleasure's all mine, and I've really enjoyed the short time we've had together, and I look forward to having another conversation after. And then you can tell me. I thought you learned something last time. So,
There you go. Well, somebody has to ask the question.
yeah,
All right.
that's right.
All right. Listen, stay in the line. We're going to do a real quick close, and you and I can have a final chat. Okay.
Sure.
All right, folks. What a phenomenal episode. I think this is probably the longest one I've had this year. Occasionally, I come close to reaching the hour mark. We're at 55 minutes and 40 some seconds. What a wonderful conversation, and just the adventures and really the passion for exploring, whether it's the continent or the oceans, and just the challenges and the lessons, and just really being able to kind of tie those pieces together. And this was a wonderful story. So we appreciate Bert sharing that with us. I hope you enjoyed it as well. And I am going to ask Bert after we're done if he'll share some photos with us to at least document in our show notes what some of these adventures perhaps looked like. Now, we're going to provide backlinks to his website, terHart.com. And from that website, you can then jump off into his business website as well as his social sites. We'll have all that in the show notes. As for us, you can find this episode on our website, outdooradventureseries.com. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn on our Outdoor Adventure Series pages. You can find this episode, the full video of it, on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can listen to the episode in whatever podcast directory you use to listen to your podcast. I'm actually kind of wondering can you listen to podcasts when you're out in the middle of the ocean? I guess you could download it all and listen to it. So Bert, you can just download my entire catalog of 200 episodes. So next time you're out there. And of course, we want to thank our good friends at Podmatch. This is the site I use to book my guests, and was able to meet Bert there. And really, I knew this was going to be a phenomenal episode. And so again, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it as well. All right, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. We are very quickly getting to the end of the year, and we are in the holiday season right now. So by the time this episode gets published and is available, we will have passed into the new year, 2025. So I hope you are safe, but have fun, take care of yourselves and your family, and also get out there and explore, okay? And we look forward to having you join us next year on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.